So we're going to be looking at 1 Samuel chapter 14 this morning. And I'm going to go ahead and read the first 14 verses. We'll start with those. And actually we'll start with the 23rd verse of chapter 13. Now a detachment of Philistines had gone out to the pass at Michmash. One day Jonathan, son of Saul, said to the young man bearing his armor, "Come, let's go over to the Philistine outpost on the other side." But he did not tell his father. Saul was staying on the outskirts of Gibeath under a pomegranate tree in Migron. With him were about 600 men, among whom was Ahijah, who was wearing an ephod. He was a son of Ichabod's brother, Atu, son of Phinehas, the son of Eli, the Lord's priest in Shiloh. No one was aware that Jonathan had left. On each side of the pass that Jonathan intended to cross to reach the Philistine outpost was a cliff. One was called Bozez and the other Seneh. One cliff stood to the north toward Michmash, the other south toward Geba. Jonathan said to his young armor-bearer, "Come, let's go over to the outpost of those uncircumcised fellows. Perhaps the Lord will act in our behalf. Nothing can hinder the Lord from saving, whether by many or by few. Do all that you have in mind," his armor-bearer said. "Go ahead, I am with you, heart and soul." Jonathan said, "Come then, we will cross over toward the men and let them see us. If they say to us, 'Wait there until we come to you,' we will stay where we are and not go up to them. But if they say, 'Come up to us,' we will climb up, because that will be our sign that the Lord has given them into our hands." So both of them showed themselves to the Philistine outpost. "Look," said the Philistines, "the Hebrews are crawling out of their holes where they're that they were hiding in." The men of the outpost shouted to Jonathan and his armor-bearer, "Come up to us and we'll teach you a lesson." So Jonathan said to his armor-bearer, "Climb up after me. The Lord has given them into the hand of Israel." Jonathan climbed up using his hands and feet with his armor-bearer right behind him. The Philistines fell before Jonathan, and his armor-bearer followed and killed behind him. In that first attack, Jonathan and his armor-bearer killed some 20 men in an area of about half an acre. Okay, so Jonathan is going to take things into his own hands at this point in time. And the location here is, if you could picture this, the pass that they're going through runs east and to west, like this. North is here, south is here. And what the Philistines have the high ground on the north side of the pass, and the Jews have the high ground on the south side of the pass. So if you've got lookouts on the highest points on either side, you can see what's going on down in the pass or down in the valley. So both armies have people positioned in those key places. So Jonathan takes it upon himself to get involved in the battle with the Philistines. And he takes his young armor-bearer with him. And if it says the armor-bearer is young, he's probably in his early teens, because Jonathan's probably about 20. So this guy's young compared to Jonathan. So you've got a 20-year-old and a 13 or 14-year-old that are going to fight the Philistines. And remember, there's a pile of them too. So right off, we see that they have a lot of courage. And we're going to see that where they get their courage is from the Lord. So in verse 2 and 3, Saul and 600 men, including a priest, and the fact that there's a priest there is important. That's why it's brought out. It said there's 600 men and a priest. And the priest is Eli's great-grandson. And there's an importance for mentioning that. One, there's a priest there. And two, he's of the bloodline of Eli. Now, remember, Eli's going to lose his lineage for priesthood. So his great-grandson is not the line that God's going to use for the priesthood in the nation of Israel. So right off, Saul's advisor, his priest, is of skeptical background. This is not the lineage that God's going to use eventually to carry on the priesthood in the nation of Israel. But anyway, he's there, Saul's there, and 600 men. And we're going to see here there's a huge difference between Jonathan and his father and how they relate to God and how they work for God. In verses 6 through 12, you're going to see Jonathan's faith and obedience to God. First of all, it was detestable to Jonathan that there were Philistines in the land that God gave them. In verse 6, it says that he called them uncircumcised fellows. That's a huge derogatory comment about the Philistines. It lets you know right there that Jonathan can't stand them or their people, and he can't stand them being in the country that God gave him. And he wants them gone. And he knows that God has the power to do that. So Jonathan's armor bearer has the same faith in God that Jonathan does. His armor bearer says, let's go for it. I'm behind you 100%, and whatever you think's best to do, I'm following you. So there's great faith and trust here in these two men in the power of God. And they're young. And he's going to use them in a mighty way. So once they are on their way, what's the first thing that Jonathan does? He seeks the Lord's guidance. He doesn't go off on his own and say, I am going up here and defeat the Philistines. He says, we need to find out if God is with us. And if he lets us know for sure he's with us, then we can't be defeated. And that's huge faith in God. And so in verse 7, or verse 8 through 10, Jonathan asked for God's approval. If you're with me, show me that you're with me. And there's nothing wrong with that. You need to be sure, if you're doing something for God, that you're actually really doing it for him. And you need to be sure that he is behind what you're doing. If not, it's going to be a total failure. It's not going to work. And before you enter into anything, seek God's approval. And that applies to everything in our lives, just as it did Jonathan. His seems more important, more dynamic, but the same thing applies to us. God is just as helpful, just as caring, just as loving to us as he was to Jonathan. So Jonathan's asked for God to show him what to do. And he, much like Gideon, remember Gideon says, if you're with me, I'm going to put a fleece out here. Now this is kind of, you're not really trusting God because he did it twice. But still, he said, if it's wet in the morning and all the ground's dry, I know you're with me. So then he switched it, and God did it again, opposite. Ground was wet, fleece was dry. But anyway, that's what Jonathan's doing. I want to be 100% sure you're with me. So he says, if the Philistines say, when we get in the valley and the Philistines say, you stay there in the valley, you wait right there, we're going to come down to you, then our mission's not going to succeed. And we need to just stop. But if the Philistines say, come up here to us, then I know that nothing can stop us from destroying them. So that's the parameters that he set up for God's will. And so when they get into the valley, in verse 11, so both men showed themselves to the Philistine outpost. Look, said the Philistines in verse 11, the Hebrews are crawling out of the holes they were hiding in. That's really insulting. And it's to antagonize Jonathan into doing something rash. But he doesn't. He waits. And then it says, the men of the outpost shouted to Jonathan and his armor bearer, come up to us and we'll teach you a lesson. Jonathan's ready to go. That's exactly what he asked God to do, and God did it. They said exactly what they wanted God to tell them. And so, and it shows you the determination. It says, so Jonathan said to his armor bearer, climb up after me. The Lord has given them into the hand of Israel. Jonathan climbed up using his hands and feet, and his armor bearer right behind him. This was a steep cliff, so to speak. And when it says climbing up with his hands and feet, he's just clawing up the side of this cliff to the top of the mountain. He is determined he's going to get up there. And nothing's going to stop him. And why didn't the Philistines kill them while they're hanging on the side of this cliff coming up? Probably arrogance. We're going to wait till they get up here, capture them, torture them, do all kinds of stuff, parade them through the valley so the Israelites on the other side, the south side, can see what we've done. So they get up there. And once they get up there, they attack. And the Philistines, they kill 20 of them. And the rest of them run. They take off. So Jonathan's attack is a success. And in the next part, verses 15 through 23, Saul is going to join this battle, sort of. But because of Jonathan's faith and trust, God takes a little bit from his servant Jonathan and magnifies it into a great victory for the nation of Israel. Because basically Jonathan turns this over to the Lord. And you do a little, God will do a lot. And in verse 15, look at what took place here. Now, Jonathan kills, and his armor bearer killed 20 people. Then panic struck the whole army, those in the camp and field, and those in the outpost and raiding parties, and the ground shook. It was panic sent by God. Who's fighting for Israel again? God. He has thrown these people into panic, just like he did earlier. Israel never won a battle. God always won the battles. Remember we talked about earlier, they don't have anything to fight with. So how are they going to win a battle? They've been winning all these battles, and they're so stupid as to think they're doing it. When God is killing the enemy right before them and routing them, and they're terrified because God's using thunder, lightning, wind, and earthquakes. And nobody's going to stand to the wrath of God. So that's why this army flees. Not because of Jonathan, not because of his armor bearer, but because of their faith in the power of God. So in verse 16, Saul gets involved. And this starts right here. This chapter just shows you how sorry and honored and pretentious and egotistical Saul is, and how he's just incompetent. Look at verse 16. Saul's lookout at Gibeath in Benjamin saw the army melting away in all directions. So you remember I said they had an outpost, people looking off that. Well, they see all these Philistines running in total disarray and panic. They're running away. And so they come to Saul and they said, they tell him what's happening. Then Saul said to the men who were with him, muster the forces and see who has left us. When they did, it was Jonathan and his armor bearer who were not there. Okay. You only got an army of 600 men. At one time, you had an army of 300,000. Jonathan is your second in command of everything that goes on. That would be like saying the president doesn't know where the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff are in a time of war. That's how incompetent this is. He doesn't know that Jonathan isn't there. How can you be the king leading an army as small as 600 men and not know where A, your son is, and B, the second most important person in the whole nation of Israel when it comes to power and authority? You don't know where they are. You don't know they're gone. That's incompetent leadership. And God uses this to show us how bad Saul was. And so Saul's going to get involved once he finds out who it is. And Saul said to Ahijah, that's the priest, he says, bring the ark of God. Now, here's one of those things in Samuel again that's probably a little bit of a mistranslation. The word there probably should be bring the ephod of God. Because you remember the ark is in somebody's basement outside of Ramah. So if you're going to bring the ark, it's going to be quite a while before it gets there. And what's happening is happening right now. It's happening fast. So, and in the Septuagint translates this as ephod. Some of the old Hebrew manuscripts do have ark in there, and we translated it as ark. And as we talked before, ancient Hebrew is very difficult sometimes to get 100% accurate. Does it change the message or hurt God's message here? Not at all. It's not that kind of a problem. But anyway, more than likely, what he's saying is bring the ephod. Because that was there. The priest had the ephod, which contained the two stones, the Urim and the Thummim, that they used to find out what God's will was. Casting of lots. So anyway, Saul says, bring that to me. Look how he takes charge and how he's getting important. Now, he's done nothing. Absolutely nothing. Doesn't even know his son's there, not there. His son's the one that's got the Philistines indirectly in utter chaos because of his faith in God. And now Saul's going to take over. Saul looks, anyway, while Saul was talking to the priest, the tumult in the Philistine camp increased more and more. So Saul said to the priest, withdraw your hand. Okay, this is a big deal. Saul has asked the priest to tell him whether or not God is with him. And when it says withdraw your hand, it means the priest had reached in to the ephod, which is on his breast, to take the two stones out in order to cast them and find out God's will. Before he can do that, Saul takes it upon himself to say, stop, I don't need God's authority or approval. That's what he's saying right here. Stop. I see them running. I'm going to take over. I don't need God's approval. That's what he's saying when he said, take your hand out. He stopped the priest and he stopped God from being involved. Then Saul and his men assembled and went to battle. Who is winning this battle? Look what God has done. They found the Philistines in total confusion, striking each other with their swords. So who is killing the Philistines? God has got them killing themselves. Now this is interesting. God never changes, and he never changes how he fights. And that's what happens in the book of Revelation at the Battle of Armageddon. The combatants that are trying to destroy the Jews at Armageddon turn and start killing each other till there's basically no one left alive. The same tactics God used to defeat the Philistines, he's going to use that same tactic at the end. He doesn't change. He uses his power, and he always will. So that's what's happened. Saul has nothing to do with the defeat of the Philistines. And look how sorry and ornery the Jews are. It said he assembled his men. He found them in total confusion, so the Jews had nothing to do with it. Verse 21, those Hebrews that had previously been with the Philistines, what? You've got Jews, Israelites, that have sided with the Philistines? They're traitors. Now they see, oh, Philistines are losing. I'm going to switch back over to being an Israelite again. That's not too good. And then, when the Israelites, then it goes on down, when all the Israelites who had hidden in the hill country of Ephraim heard that the Philistines were on the run, they joined the battle in hot pursuit. So here they are coming out of the cisterns, out of the pits, out of the woods. Oh, they're running. Now we'll go get in the battle and chase them away. So the quality of the character of the Israelites under Saul stinks. They're traitors, they're cowards, they're crowd followers, and that's what the nation of Israel is at this point in time. And that's what Saul's leading. And although there are some good men, they're few and far behind, few and far between. And it ends, verse 23, so the Lord rescued Israel that day, and the battle moved beyond Beth Aven. Who won the battle? God. Saul had nothing to do with it at all. Jonathan, a little bit instrumental. His faith in God allowed God to reveal himself to the nation of Israel. Saul did nothing. And the people of Israel that were traitors and cowards did nothing. They just fell in line behind the next popular hero. That's all they did. So once that takes place, we find out again the arrogance and the egotistic attitude of Saul. Starting in verse 24, now the men of Israel were in distress that day because Saul had bound the people under an oath, saying, cursed be any man who eats food before evening comes, before I have avenged myself on my enemies. So none of the troops tasted food. What is the last thing you want to do to an army that's getting ready to fight? Starve them? Does that make any sense? No. And So Saul uses God as he pleases to control his people. So he wants total control over the people. So he gets all of his soldiers to swear an oath that we're not going to eat till the battle's won. Because that puts Saul in control of the people by them being afraid of God. Do countries do that now? The entire religion of Islam is based on this fact. We will control the people because we will make them afraid of God. That they're not going to follow Him. And we determine what those guidelines are. And that's what Saul did. God's going to do something to you because you swore an oath not to eat. That was not God's intention. God does not do stupid stuff. This was stupid. And if you don't think it was stupid, look at verse 29. Jonathan said, "My father has made trouble for the country. See how my eyes brightened when I tasted a little of this honey." So that goes ahead. But even Jonathan said, "This is the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. My father has told you not to eat and swear an oath not to eat." Also, who are you fighting the Philistines for? What's the purpose in driving the Philistines out of the Promised Land? Why do you want them gone? To honor and glorify God. That's the whole reason you want them gone. Because they're not supposed to be there. That's God's holy land for His holy people. They shouldn't be there. So to honor God, they need to be driven out. And God can take care of that if you follow Him. Look who Saul is worried about. It says in verse 25, "I have avenged." In other words, you're not going to eat any food before I have avenged myself on my enemies. Who is Saul driving the Philistines out for? Himself. Not for God. He is self-centered, egotistical, and controlling. And he uses God flippantly to try to control the people. So, in verse 25, the entire army entered the woods, and there's honey laying on the ground. You think God wasn't tempting them to rebel against Saul? You're starving to death. And if you've been in this battle any at all, that's one of the most stressful, physical, demanding things in this world, is to be in combat. And here's no enemy. It's been virtually defeated. And there's honey sitting here on the ground, which does two things. It's sugary, gives you instant energy, and it has a lot of nutritional value. So, but they didn't eat it because they were scared that God would kill them. So anyway, Jonathan hadn't heard about that, and I'll just paraphrase this. Jonathan wasn't around. Remember, he was out doing what God wanted him to when Saul made that, the people take that oath. So Jonathan, A, didn't take the oath, and 2, didn't know anything about it. So Jonathan's in there, and he sees the honey, sticks his spear in it, licks it, and it says in verse 29, "See how my eyes brightened when I tasted a little of this honey." In other words, he was rejuvenated. He was refreshed. His strength returned to him because he had some food to eat. So Jonathan's totally against this insanity that Saul was doing. So in verse 31 and the rest of this chapter pretty much, verse 31, the day after the Israelites had struck down the Philistines. Does anybody know what time it is? I hate to interrupt. My clock's gone. 25 too. Okay. don't know the climb. His foot was gone. Okay. Anyway, after the Philistines had run and all that stuff and were exhausted, Saul had set up the Israelites to break God's law. He is the instrument of what's about to happen. Because these people were so hungry and so physically worn out that they're getting where they're afraid that they're going to die from starvation or from not eating. And so when the Philistines run and the men pounced on the plunder in verse 32 and took sheep, cattle, and calves. They butchered them on the ground and ate them together with the blood. Okay. Remember way back in Exodus, way back in Genesis, one thing you weren't supposed to do is eat meat with the blood still in it. And that's what kosher preparation is. When you say something's kosher, if it's meat, it means the blood has been drained out of the animal before the meat's prepared for you to eat. That's what kosher, that's part of what kosher means. The other is it's been blessed by a rabbi. But anyway, that was just abhorrent to God, to eat blood. And that's what they did. Why did they do it? They're losing their minds from hunger. So they got all these animals, they kill them. They're eating this stuff raw. They're not even taking time to cook it. So that's how hungry they were. Saul caused that problem. Saul caused all of his men to defy God's law. He put them in that situation. And that's not godly leadership. You do not put God's people in situations to sin. You put them in situations to succeed in God's word. So that's what he's done. He is the one that's responsible for this. But look what he does. He wants to blame that on someone else. And I'm going to tell you, it doesn't say that. I don't even know if Saul knew that you weren't supposed to do that. He knew so little about God and a relationship with him that it's possible he doesn't even know they're not supposed to do that. Because it says here in verse 33, then someone said to Saul, look, the men are sinning against the Lord by eating meat that has blood in it. Saul didn't come up with that. Somebody had to tell him they were sinning by eating meat that had blood in it. So I'm not even sure Saul knew until he was told that this was wrong. So anyway, after you get to that, then Saul says, you have broken faith, he said. Oh, now he's Mr. Righteous. You have broken faith, he said. Roll a large stone over here at once. Then he said, go out among the men and tell them, each of you, bring me your cattle and sheep and slaughter them here and eat them. Do not sin against the Lord by eating meat with blood still in it. Now he's in charge again. He's telling them how they ought to worship and how they ought to be holy and not sin against God. So everyone brought his ox that night and slaughtered it there. Then Saul built an altar to the Lord. It was the first time he had done this. Another key point about Saul's spiritual relationship. If you were a leading Jew, if you're the king of Israel, don't you think that somewhere along the line you would have built an altar to God? Because that's how you showed your faith in God. That's how you showed your appreciation to God. That's how you showed your desire for God's forgiveness and a desire to thank God for what he was doing. And Abraham built altars. Isaac built altars. Jacob built altars. David built altars. Samuel built altars. Saul had never built one. This is the first time he's ever done it. He had no relationship with God in his life. Once he does that, then he said, let's go down. He comes up with a bright idea. Okay, everything's supposed to be okay now? He comes up with a bright idea. Saul said, let us go down after the Philistines by night and plunder them till dawn, and let us not leave one of them. Is he asking God about whether we should do that or not? The king, the way God set it up, was not to do anything without asking God first. God was still in charge, not the king. Saul comes up with this bright idea. His men, you can tell, are not happy with it. It says, do whatever seems best to you, they replied. But the priest said, now this is an admirable move here by the priest. The priest said, let us inquire of God. So, hold on, Saul. Let's see what God thinks about it. So Saul asked God, shall I go down after the Philistines? Will you give them into Israel's hands? But God did not answer him. Now, first of all, Saul should have had the priest praying also. And he didn't. Saul thinks he's important enough to do all this, and he expected God to agree with him, whether he's right or wrong. How many of you expect God to agree with you in all situations? It's not going to work too well, is it? That's what Saul's doing. Okay, God, I want to go down there and do this. You need to agree with that. That's his attitude. And God didn't answer. God's not listening to this guy.